Modern refinements such as marble pools, enamel bathtubs, showers, and nickel pipes have no place in the sauna. The inside of the bathhouse must not even be oiled, timber and rough boards being the best materials for it. H.J. Viroqua from his book, Sauna, the Finnish Bath.
Hola, this is Risto, and welcome back to the Sauna Trail podcast. Thank you for joining us in our adventures as we share the story of how our family stumbled into the world of Finnish sauna. You might be wondering, why would anyone do a podcast dedicated to something as commonplace as sauna? It's like doing a podcast about forks or onions or pencil sharpeners. Well, if you stick around, you might find out that there's more to sauna than you realized. In this episode, I'll share my attempts to pressure my brother and father into trying Finnish sauna. And it also marks my first time pairing the heat of sauna with a cold plunge. Last week, Julie and I recounted the story of using our first wood-burning sauna in northern Wisconsin and how it was helpful during a rocky patch of our marriage. If you haven't listened to it yet, I would encourage you to check it out. It's episode 3, and the title is Getting Naked. There's a link to it on the screen. These early episodes are presented as a story and in progressive steps, so it's best to listen to them in order. I thoroughly enjoyed the sauna in northern Wisconsin and decided I wanted to share this newfound expression of Finnish sauna with my brother and father. I'm an evangelist by nature, and I'm always sharing what good things I've found with everyone around me. Whether it's a new roast of natural processed Ethiopian coffee, or a Mexican salsa, or a rare Chinese oolong tea, or a new book, or the original good news, the gospel of Jesus Christ. If it's good, I'll tell you about it. Outside of our household, my brother's been my closest partner in sauna adventures. He's been with me to sketchy public banyas, saunas at random campgrounds, and even ended up getting his own excellent sauna setup. And I knew my dad always liked saunas. I remember him talking about ones that he'd used in Germany on a business trip, and he occasionally used them when we were at hotels on vacation. This is the story of how I introduced both of them to Finnish sauna. I mentioned in our last episode that I'd found a small rental in Wisconsin on VRBO, which is a vacation rental website. It was in the owner's basement and was pretty affordable, but Julie and I decided to go to the one in northern Wisconsin instead because it was a little bit nicer. So I thought that a closer and cheaper one might be good for my dad and brother to try. If I remember correctly, it was about $125 for 3 people and included breakfast. So it was affordable and close. There aren't many saunas in southeast Minnesota where we live, so it requires driving at least a couple hours to find one. I've shared some tips and tricks for finding sauna rentals on our local page. I'll put the link to that in the description of this episode. So I emailed the owner, Anne, to see if we could stay for a night. She said yes. Normally they would require 2 nights, but she would make an exception for true sauna hounds. I liked that label, sauna hounds, and have adopted it for myself and others who share a passion for sauna. I think maybe we'll use it for our sauna community, those who follow along our sauna journeys and join us in the conversation about Finnish sauna. You can join us in being sauna hounds. So we booked and we were all set. We drove to Wisconsin on a Sunday afternoon and arrived to find a clean but simple basement apartment below their main house. It was all situated on 80 acres in a secluded valley with a trout stream running through the property and Amish houses just over the ridge. I'll pull up some photos now so you can see what the rental was like. It was simple and clean with windows that looked out towards the sauna and down in the valley and the stream. I think they had the Opposite of Cold book there too, which is an excellent book. It's kind of like an ode to sauna in North America. It has great photos and very deep text. So I recommend, if you don't already have it, just pick up a copy from Amazon today. They recently did a second printing, so now's a good time to get a hold of it. Chris, who's one of the owners, built a small rustic sauna a ways from the house on the edge of the stream. So here's a photo now of that sauna. I think he got the wood from the land and got as much as he could for building the sauna from the local area. I didn't initially think very much of the sauna. It was a ways from the house. It was quite a bit different than the previous one we had used. Here's a picture of that. That one was quite a bit larger and used more modern materials. But mainly I was just excited to introduce my dad and brother. So we saunted that first evening, and the main thing that I remember about it is that it was super hot. Chris, they had asked if we wanted them to heat the sauna stove for us. And we said, sure, because after my last experience, I knew I wasn't very good at that. So Chris heated it up and he got it blazing hot. There was no thermometer in there, so I'm not exactly sure how hot it was. But if I had to guess now, after all of our experiences, it was probably 210, 220 plus. And it was a pretty small sauna space, so it felt very hot. I insisted that we sauna naked. So it was my dad, my brother, and I naked in this sauna in the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin. And they offered us spring water to drink. I remember them saying that it was structured right, that it was better than regular water. Maybe they're referring to the minerals in the water. And they'd also left a little handwritten sheet about how to sauna. I think I took a photo of that sheet, but I can't find it. And I wish I could find it because I'd like to see what it said. I'm sure it really helped us because we didn't really know what we were doing. I do remember that it was hard to get into the stream. The stream is pretty shallow most of the ways, but they had a deep area right next to the sauna that was like 5 or 6 feet kind of deep. Probably not 6 feet, closer to like 5 feet or 4.5 feet. Because I remember that when Julie went, she could stand in it. But there was like a rock that you could kind of get down onto, and then you had to kind of put your legs over to get into the water. So it was fairly difficult. And especially if you're coming out of the sauna hot and naked, it was even more difficult. The sauna had a small changing room, and then inside it was pretty simple: 2 benches, an Asian wok for a ladle, and then a stove that they said was made by a high school in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, in Ironwood, Michigan, that the high school students welded together. So I remember we enjoyed sauna that evening. My brother, I was impressed by how much steam and heat he could take. And it was just a good time to relax. The next day, they had breakfast. If you remember, I said they included breakfast with the rental, and it totally exceeded my expectations. The breakfast was superb. I don't remember exactly what it was, but there were probably quite a few local ingredients, and it was really well prepared. I think Anne cooked it up. And we decided we wanted to do another sauna session before we left. So it was heated up. I can't remember if we heated it or Chris heated it. I think it was probably Chris, so it was pretty hot again. And it was probably lighter outside. And this was an interesting sauna round for me because it was the first time I remember getting the sauna spins. The sauna spins are when you've exposed yourself to the heat and steam of the sauna, and then you go into cold and linger in the cold for a while, and then come out and relax, lay back or sit down. And then it feels like, I tell people, it feels like someone kind of unzipped the world around you and you feel like you're starting to spin, or the world around you starting to spin a little bit, just kind of slowly back and forth. And it's not, you don't feel very nauseous or anything. In fact, it can be pleasant if you know that it's coming, but it was pretty wild. I remember my brother, who's a doctor, saying, I said, like, noticed the pulse in his throat, and he did in mine as well. And I remember him saying that it wasn't just like elevated heart rate, but there was much more volume, which was kind of an indication that like the whole vascular system was getting a workout and the vessels and veins were expanding and having quite a bit more flow. So now let me show you some 360-degree photos of the sauna. If you're listening to the podcast, I'll do my best to describe it, but you can go see them at our website, thesaunatrail.com, for the post for this episode, or over at our locals community, which is thesaunatrail.locals.com. So this is the outside of the sauna. You can see that it's set by the stream, and you can even see the rock where we were trying to get down into the water that was so difficult. I'll pan around here real quick so you can get an idea of the valley. There's the ridge that the Amish lived over the top of that ridge. And a bridge here to cross over the stream. And as you can see, it is really secluded here. Those buildings back there are part of their property. So you can't see any neighbors. You can't really see anyone on the road. And then as we get closer to the sauna here, you can see the door open. Off to the left here is the house. Let me give you another picture of the stream here. So that's what it looks like as you're trying to get down in there. Like I said, it drops off right away. About 4.5 feet deep. You could probably jump in the summer if you're careful. And you can see the materials that he used to make it. The changing room is super tiny. Just a little area to set your stuff, a lamp, some matches, some essential oils. I don't think we really use those essential oils. And then the hot room. You can see the ladles there that they used, and a hook for hanging things up, a towel or a robe if you're using it. I don't know what kind of wood he used. It was maybe some sort of pine. You can see it has lots of knots. Pretty rustic. Pretty rustic. And the floor, which was fairly dirty. You know, you're tracking a lot of dirt and things you tried not to. And then the stove, which is pretty humble here. This is the one that was welded by the high school students. It had a decent amount of rocks. The rocks went down even on the side. I don't know how much they paid for it. It'd be interesting to ask them how much they paid. It's probably pretty affordable. If I had to guess, they maybe spent maybe $400 to $600 for that stove. We might get them on the podcast later. It would be cool to talk to Chris about how he built the sauna. So that's basically it for the sauna. So we were probably pretty relaxed driving back home that day. I do remember liking the sauna spins and really enjoying the cold plunge aspect of it, even though we weren't in the stream super long. And it was May, so the water was probably decently chilly, but not super chilly. It had already warmed up a little bit. I liked the price of that rental and how close it was to our home, but my overall assessment was that it was pretty rustic and primitive, and it was hard to get in the water. So I was confident that I would probably find a better sauna later. One that was easier to get in the water for the cold plunge and that had nicer and more modern facilities. So that pretty much sums up everything for this stop on the sauna trail. If you have any questions, please leave it in the comments, or you can message us. The locals community or our Facebook page are probably the best places to do that. Thanks for joining me on this stop on the sauna trail. Our next episode will be a bit different. I'll be sharing an overview of the history of Finnish sauna in North America and how it's evolved over time. Thank you for watching or listening. You can find more sauna resources on our locals community. I've posted a guide to great sauna books and videos, and then another guide for hacking Google to find good sauna rentals. It's free for you to join, and you'll get regular updates from us. And if you would like to support the podcast, Locals has that option as well. It helps offset the cost of podcast equipment. The link is in the show notes, and we appreciate all of our supporters and fellow sauna hounds. Thank you very much. Our podcast can be found on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and other streaming platforms, as well as our website, thesaunatrail.com. New episodes released every Saturday, which is the traditional Finnish day for sauna, also called saunapäivä. We hope to see you on the sauna trail.